Hello, dear friends. We are so glad you're here to learn about the reality of dissociative identity disorder. Welcome to Season 3. We are your hosts, Drew
and Garden System,
a couple of multiples.
We are a married couple, and we both have dissociative identity disorder. Did you know that 120 million people across the globe live with dissociative identity disorder and are often misdiagnosed for 6 to 12 years?
We hope to help educate and dispel myths about DID to help people find the right diagnosis and appropriate treatment as quickly as possible.
Please visit acoupleofmultiples.com and sign up for our mailing list to stay up to date with our podcast, our private paid online DID community called Hearts Multiplied, and to book consultations.
That's right. Drew and Garden System are now offering consultation to help educate and support those living with and treating dissociative identity disorder. You can book an appointment with either Garden System or both Drew and Garden System right from our website, acoupleofmultiples.com.
We hope you enjoy this episode and learn something new.
We appreciate all of our reviews, and we love to hear from you, dear listener, about what you enjoyed the most. We are honored to have multiple sponsors for Season 3. You can find links to each sponsor's webpage in the show notes of every episode and on our website under the Listen to Our Podcast tab. The Institute for Creative Mindfulness, one of the largest EMDR therapy training programs in North America, is directed by Dr. Jamie Plus Marich, the only EMDR therapy trainer who is out as a plural and offers the full EMDR therapy basic training in a way that honors lived experience and destigmatizes dissociation in clinical work.
We felt so validated when we were able to authentically participate in this training as Garden System. Go to www.instituteforcreativemindfulness.com for a full list of upcoming trainings, both online and in person, offered by Dr. Jamie and her selected network of EMDR trainers.
Bearings therapy is different from anything you've ever tried. You spend your nights worrying about whether you did the right thing, whether you're failing your family, how you and your spouse don't connect anymore, and those things haunt you at night.
You don't feel comfortable talking to anyone. A, you don't want to relive it, and B, you're not interested in talking about your garbage. You may feel lost right now, but I'll be your compass. Get your bearings. Call me today, 214-892-2158. As a certified internal family systems licensed therapist, Tiffany Morgan, owner of Holistic Self-Healing Psychotherapy, specializes in working with dissociative identities through IFS and sculpting.
Known affectionately as Ocean, she brings lived experience with dissociative identities and anorexia, offering consulting, psychotherapy, training, and authoring a book on personal and professional experiences in these areas.
Visit www.tiffanycobb with 2 B's, Morgan.com. www.tiffanycobbmorgan.com or call 520-582-9313 for more information.
Hello, dear friends, and welcome to another spicy episode with Drew
and Garden System,
a couple of multiples.
We are here with part 2 of Sex and Intimacy When You're a Multiple. For part 2, we're going to cover more details about what happens under the sheets when you have dissociative identity disorder.
Oh my goodness. Seriously, wifey, I'm dying.
All humor aside, though, this topic is very serious and very difficult to discuss. It's not easy being vulnerable and sharing such personal details on a platform such as this. And we are quite a bit scared to go into this topic. We are doing it, though, because we recognize how important it is to discuss. When we share and tell our stories, shame dies. When we speak up, we discover that we are not alone. There are others struggling in similar ways. And if I have learned anything in my journey attempting to recover from my trauma, it is that we can find healing in our community. We might feel scared, but we can do scary things. We've already survived some of the worst things that can happen to a human being. And if our story is helpful even to just one other person, then it is worth telling.
Worth telling is right. Well, as we have said, this is part 2 of us talking about intimacy and sex. And in part 1, we ended saying we would talk about the types of parts that might show up during sexual encounters. For my system in particular, there are many of us that show up during. Actually, we don't switch a lot in daily life, but when it comes to sex, that's when it happens. We will give personal examples of how the switching tends to happen for us. But before we do, we can talk specifically about sexual alters. Although not all selves that show up during sex are necessarily specifically only sexual alters, yet some are. Sexual alters often form as a natural response to sexual trauma, and also sexual alters can be purposely created by perpetrators. In my experience, both types of sexual parts are found in my system. Some form naturally of their own accord in response to recurring trauma, and some were purposely created by the perpetrator group. And many of my littles, tweens, and teens have sexual aspects or behaviors that formed as a natural response to trauma. One of my teens named Pink, and also my large group of cat alters, were purposely created to perform and carry out specific sexual acts by the perpetrator group. Then there were parts that were created to be still and remain silent when sexual acts were being done to them. My littles named Ashley and Sparkle are such parts. Then I have my adult self that they created and named the Dark Phoenix, who was created to perpetrate and train other littles. Nearly all of my selves who identify as part of the undead world were created by the perpetrator group.
And for my system, it was a journey discovering our sexual alters. At first, we thought Kilera was our sexual alter, and in many ways she is, but she is much more than that and always has been. What we didn't know was that a sexual alter that had been created by our abusers was hiding just behind Kilera. We had blamed a lot of unwanted sexual behaviors on Kilera when in fact it was this other alter, Vivian. We didn't discover Vivian until we started being intimate with Drew. Somehow, being with a woman made it possible for us to become aware of Vivian's existence.
What happened when you discovered Vivian?
It created a lot of internal chaos, actually. Everything felt upside down inside, and Vivian felt so wild to all of us. Vivian, as it turns out, was purposely created by abusers and had been out of our awareness. What was so upsetting was how opposite she was to Jenny. We were having awful flashbacks that terrified Jenny, but Vivian was laughing and saying how she liked it. It was really disturbing for the rest of our system.
Yes, it can be really disturbing and alarming when these types of parts surface, because usually they are so against the grain of how the others think, act, or function. And quite frankly, for me personally, it made me want to push this type of part away, which, let me tell you, doesn't work. My part Pink, who encompasses a lot of our sexuality, flat out started blocking us when we first discovered her so she could do whatever she wanted to do in the body, which was no bueno. I think this was because of our resistance and pushing her away. We learned to approach her with curiosity instead and to gently educate her and bring her up to speed about her life, and that worked a lot better.
For us, Vivian was out of control and threatening to basically come on to other people, and we ended up locking her up in the internal world. She was like a wild, feral animal in many ways inside. It was scary to see her and hear her internally. We spent weeks in therapy trying to figure out what to do with her and how to handle her. We were terrified of her and terrified to let her go free. Consequences to her actions were not something we wanted to face if she were to front. The scariest part for us during this process was figuring out that Vivian wasn't an adult part. She was a little.
For us, when Pink came on the scene, she did act out, whether we were around or she was blocking us. In a way, it didn't seem like she was trying to threaten us. This is just the way she was. She needed to be educated about boundaries and rules. You can't drive around without a top on, and you can't run half naked down the street, you know? It was a scary, embarrassing time for us. But ultimately, when Pink started talking to our therapist and we started having good internal communication with her, Pink learned the rules and appropriate outlets. We introduced her to other fun things to do that didn't involve running around half naked or sex. We took her shopping and bought her a Nintendo DS. She loves the fashion games. She also learned that she could be sexual with the other parts of me internally. So my part Adam in her became a thing. Adam is another tween part of mine. It helped.
With Vivian, it was just waiting it out for her to grow exhausted from her internal temper tantrums and doing EMDR on the flashbacks where she was laughing at Jenny. EMDR became very intense and difficult, and Jenny started becoming more and more frightened of even doing the EMDR. This was when our brilliant therapist suggested we do EMDR on just the fear of doing the EMDR on that memory, and that was exactly the key we needed. What Jenny was able to process in that session was the fact that Vivian was protecting Jenny by laughing. She wasn't laughing at Jenny like we had thought. If she could laugh and not be afraid, then she could take over and endure the abuse so Jenny didn't have to anymore. The next time that flashback tried to rear its ugly head, Jenny was able to hold up her hand and say, "Stop, I'm not afraid." And that flashback ceased immediately. Vivian seemed to settle down a lot after that flashback had been conquered, and also because Jenny wasn't hating on her so bad anymore.
Yes, understanding comes about the less the system tries to push away and gets to the bottom of how and why a part came about. Pink, too, was created by the perpetrator group to do the things that they wanted her to do. But honestly, she served a positive purpose for us, too. We were a child that didn't want to be doing those things. But since she was created to want to, that meant the rest of us didn't have to. Facing what these types of parts had to do is hard. It's triggering. But facing it is also healing. We aren't scared of Pink anymore. We are so happy to have her because now she's becoming the key to our healthy and happy sexuality. There obviously is still a lot of work to be done here because she's not the only one around, and my others have different feelings and thoughts about sex, but she's not the enemy or to be feared.
It's so easy to view these parts as the enemy. Vivian definitely felt like an enemy. She was scary. We felt a loss of control with her, and we just wanted her gone, especially when we realized she was a little. It felt so wrong to have a little be as sexual as Vivian was being. Sex is hard enough and confusing enough as a trauma survivor dealing with littles who don't want the body to have sex. Now throw in a little that does, and everything we knew was turned upside down. Littles and sex is a complicated topic for sure.
Yes, there are major opportunities for re-traumatization. And in my opinion, there are also major opportunities for corrective experiences. Since whether or not littles are directly involved in the sexual part of the relationship, which is another hot topic we will get into in a moment, a lot of the times littles will at least be aware that there is a sexual component to a relationship that the adult or teen parts are involved in. And depending on how those sexual encounters are handled, these new sexual interactions can be healing and a corrective experience.
Right. Our littles are very aware that there is a sexual component to our relationship. Often Daisy or Jenny have a tendency to want hugs and non-sexual cuddle time beforehand. Then, when they feel acknowledged, they will tuck away inside and adult selves will move into the front. However, sometimes they don't stay so tucked away. Remember Ramona who kept coming back out that one night?
Yes. Unfortunately, my little Ramona sometimes will initiate sex because she does not want the person we are with to leave us because we are not having enough sex. So often Ramona will be out at the beginning. At this point, we were trying to have her basically go away inside, since her reason for having sex isn't because she actually wants to have sex, which is actually re-traumatizing for her. So Wifey and I talked about having Ramona and Daisy go paint a picture in the internal house. But yeah, Ramona popped out a few minutes later saying, "I'm done with my picture. You want to see it?" And yeah, so sometimes littles don't stay away.
A hot topic often revolves around whether or not littles should or should not participate in sexual activities. I know some find even the thought of littles in the bedroom completely abhorrent, and others have experienced a need for littles to be allowed.
Yes, in my humble opinion, it depends on the little and the sexual situation itself. Littles aren't the same as biological children. Littles have often been around for almost as long as the body is old. That being said, my opinion is that littles should not be having sex with an adult or an adult part if the partner has DID as well. It's my opinion that this is how re-traumatization occurs and trauma reenactment, and is harmful. If one happens to be in a relationship with another multiple, and that multiple has teens and littles, then there could be an opportunity for a little or teen that wants to have these experiences to have them with another little their age in a consensual, healing way. Since again, I do not view littles as exactly the same as children that are biologically children. Of course, this all has to do with personal preference and opinion. I personally have a few littles and teens that wish to have sexual experiences with Garden System's littles and teens. And we have had the opportunity to have healing, corrective experiences together.
One tricky part of that is those selves that are capable of age sliding. Daisy, for one, can slide up to about 16 and then back down again to about 18 months of age. Kelara spends most of her time as an adult in this body, but often slides down to a 16-year-old self as well. It's a little weird to think of Daisy and Kelara sometimes being the same age. So the issue with littles and sex is not so clear-cut and dry.
No, and I think the decision should be based more on why the little or tween or teen wants to have sex, and not their age. Since, as we stated earlier, the body isn't actually 4 or 6 or 11, you know?
The why might be hard. I know Maisie, our younger teen, has a lot of curiosity and desire for exploration. Daisy, our little, just wants to feel close to our wife. Vivian, on the other hand, has more of a physical need than an emotional one. In many ways, she still tries to reenact trauma, yet trying to prevent her from having the physical experiences that go along with sex creates a lot of internal upset for our system. So it is complicated. I don't think there is one right answer. Each and every one will have to make a decision for themselves and each of their own selves about what is okay and what is not okay.
Trying to be mindful about who is present and their motive for being there seems to be what could be helpful to figure out, and also think about and or ask what is happening for one's partner.
One thing we have focused on is really being in tune with Drew, especially during moments of intimacy. We try to pay attention to who is fronting, if there are switches, and who is now fronting, and pausing to check in and evaluate if they are in a freeze response or not. And this is not as easy to tell as I thought it would be.
Like I mentioned earlier, I switch a lot in the moment, so it can be very hard to identify who is out and why. Things go better if a sexual alter is out or if one of my selves who has a sexual component to them is fronting. But often the rapid switching itself is just really disorienting. And sometimes that leads to one of my alters who has a freeze response to come out. I think this typically happens because we knew when we were little, if we would just hold still and not fight in some instances, then it would be over quicker. But, of course, this doesn't look or feel good to the person I'm with because freezing means I'm pretty much immobile on my end and not moving with no expression.
Checking in is so important while you are in the moment. When we notice the freeze happening, then we just stop and try to engage and ground at that point. Sometimes everything just has to stop, and sometimes we can get reoriented and it's okay to resume. Communication is really important throughout all of the experiences happening. Flashbacks to our sexual abuse created a lot of fear for Jenny. Jenny was holding some intense memories that would put all of us into a freeze mode. And these flashbacks came in pieces of sounds, images, and body sensations.
Sexual encounters can also cause body memories. A body memory is experiencing a feeling in the body that you have felt at a previous time, usually in reference to trauma that one has experienced. Your body might be reacting as your body did in the past, or you might feel body sensations that you experienced during trauma.
Right. Freezing is sometimes the result of those body memories, or I call them body flashbacks. Grounding and anchoring are helpful in getting back to the present. When we experience these body flashbacks while we are in the moment, it has been helpful to say Drew's name and use the 5-4-3-2-1 grounding technique to help us be in the present. 5-4-3-2-1 is where you say 5 things you see, touch 4 different objects, say 3 things you hear, 2 things you smell, and 1 thing you taste. Using our 5 senses helps us know that it is our wife that is being intimate with us. And then we can help ourselves relax and know that we are safe with her. So I might notice that I see Drew, and I might notice her face and hair. I might notice our bed and recognize that the sheets belong in the now, and it is not some bed from long ago. And it helps that Drew is a female, so that definitely puts us in the present moment too.
It is hard for me to be in the present moment when having sex. I had both male and female perpetrators, and honestly to me, it feels like overall I do not feel joy when having sexual encounters. Some of my parts feel like there is a job to be done, and some of my parts freeze or stay quiet until it is over. For intimacy and sex to look anything like a joyful, happy, healthy experience, it has come to my awareness that this is something I have to create or invent for myself. Although it is very hard to leave the past in the past, creating something fresh and new in this area and focusing on the present and the love I feel for my wife is what I'm continuing to practice and develop. The process is far from complete for me, as a large part of creating that is being able to stay present, which is super hard when I naturally rapid switch in these situations. So this inability to stay present leads to feelings of hopelessness and intensifies the feelings of parts wanting nothing to do with a sexual relationship, but at the same time still caring about the relationship, which leads to the feeling of I'm a disappointment to my partner because I'm not giving them what they want and they are not getting fulfillment from me. I am ruining their life. These thoughts are, of course, not helpful for me or wifey. In past partners and in our current relationship, my partner's disappointment, sadness, and what sometimes feels like anger leads to me feeling even more shameful, hopeless, worthless, and suicidal. These feelings of disappointment, sadness, and anger aren't wrong that my partner is feeling. They are absolutely 100% valid. And also, you can see what a challenge this really all becomes on a lot of levels. Bottom line, my goal is to have a healthy sexual relationship within my marriage. Creating something new with you, wifey, in this area is now my focus.
So I think our dear listeners might be super curious about how you are inventing that for yourself, inventing joy and happiness.
For me, it means leaning into the parts that desire a sexual relationship and having the parts that are triggered because of past events really try to focus on who we are with now, and also having these parts get into our physical body beforehand and get grounded. This usually involves us doing physical activity that is not sexual in nature before, like going on a walk or doing yoga.
Another way we have tried to get in the body and feel grounded is by attempting non-sexual contact, like a back rub. We might spend the evening with back rubs and cuddles before going to sleep, and then when we wake up in the morning, we're both much more likely to be in the mood to engage in sexual activities.
It's true. Mornings tend to be less triggering for me than evenings, although grounding with something like back rubs has worked pretty well and sometimes leads nicely into being intimate. To indicate that I'm okay with us going further than back rubs, I usually do something nonverbal, like taking wifey's hand and putting it where I feel comfortable.
It's important to really learn each other's body languages, facial expressions, and all of the nonverbal communication. When I am unsure of what is happening, I will pause and maybe back off to cuddling and check in to see if she is doing all right or not. When you are in the moment, it is important to be present and grounded in your partner and not just yourself.
So true. Some indicators that checking in might be a good idea is if your partner isn't responding to you if you ask them a question, or they seem frozen, or they look scared. Garden System and I usually begin our intimate moments making sure the littles are okay and are doing something fun in our internal worlds. As we have mentioned earlier in the episode, and if one pops out, we pause and address them lovingly, knowing they have popped out for a reason. Creating safety for all of our parts is what makes this work. Other parts may switch in and out during these moments, such as curious teens or tweens, and usually some animal parts or other non-human parts. For me, this gets very disorienting and dysregulates me. Afterward, when this happens, I have less memory of what occurred, and I tend to get caught up in the feelings my body has without memory of what created them, which can really mess up the day and be triggering. My current solution to this is having decided for myself who is to be involved in our intimate experiences and suggest to my parts that bring about the most memory loss that they have these types of experiences inside with my others in the internal world. That is, until they become more connected and co-conscious with our everyday living parts. This is the solution I have personally come up with.
Another issue with attempting to build a healthy sexual relationship with your partner is dealing with the shame that can come up. We have selves that carry a lot of fear and shame around sex, and we have selves that are quite the opposite. There are some that want nothing to do with a sexual relationship, selves that are indifferent, and selves that desperately want a sexual relationship. Some of those selves sought out sex as a way to reenact trauma, and to have a sexual response tied to those memories brings on an immense amount of shame. Something that doesn't get talked about a lot is how, after sexual trauma, the ability to have a sexual release sometimes requires imagining the trauma all over again. This aspect from our trauma carries immense shame.
I think it's important to bring up our own experiences with shame because I'm thinking we definitely aren't alone, and we don't want others feeling alone either. Yous aren't weird, odd, or bad for having these feelings, urges, or responses. Some of my parts have these exact same experiences as Garden System just described. One thing that has personally helped is doing EMDR on these trauma memories. Over time, these types of feelings are validated and sometimes change after they are reprocessed, creating room for new experiences, feelings, and desires that are associated with the current, present situation and moments, instead of past traumatic experiences.
A big help for us in reducing this shame was understanding the full story between Vivian and Jenny. Vivian was created to like sex, and her coming to the front during the trauma was to protect Jenny, who did not like what was happening to her. When Jenny understood that Vivian had saved her from having to like what was being done to us long ago, there was less discord and anger emanating from Jenny, and she stopped hating Vivian. She's more than happy to step out of Vivian's way because it isn't about Vivian going against our values as a system. It was about her protecting Jenny from having to do just that.
Yes, understanding more of the story and why certain parts feel what they feel or do what they do brings about understanding and possible acceptance, even gratitude for what that part did so others didn't have to. We had a similar experience with Pink. At first, we were scared of Pink's behavior and didn't know why she was acting out sexually. It made some of us want to try to prevent her from coming out and generated a lot of fear. Once we understood what Pink's purpose was in our trauma history, we developed gratitude for her, that she did things that none of us wanted to do. And we discovered that after we caught her up on time and place and educated her about when her skills were appropriate in our current life, she fit right in, and we have even more gratitude for her.
And we can have gratitude for Vivian without having to change her sexual preferences. So long as she learns what conduct is appropriate when and with who, it doesn't matter to the rest of us how she chooses to experience sexual encounters. And we don't have to be ashamed for which sexual acts we like or don't like.
Exactly. Rules and boundaries are important and create safety for everyone. So, in summary, we talked about different types of parts, including sexual alters that show up during intimacy. We also talked about the controversial topic of littles and intimate moments. Then we talked about our personal experiences of being in the moment and how we navigate that. We wrapped up the episode by talking about shame and how we came into acceptance.
And in the next episode, we will talk about internal relationships within a dissociative system. Sometimes parts date each other.
Until next time, thank you for hanging out with
A Couple of Multiples.
We are honored to have multiple sponsors for Season 3. You can find links to each sponsor's webpage in the show notes of every episode and on our website under the Listen to Our Podcast tab. The Institute for Creative Mindfulness, one of the largest EMDR therapy training programs in North America, is directed by Dr. Jamie Plus Marich, the only EMDR therapy trainer who is out as a plural and offers the full EMDR therapy basic training in a way that honors lived experience and destigmatizes dissociation in clinical work.
We felt so validated when we were able to authentically participate in this training as Garden System. Go to www.instituteforcreativemindfulness.com for a full list of upcoming trainings, both online and in person, offered by Dr. Jamie and her selected network of EMDR trainers. Dr. Wendy Aporta with Bearings Therapy is a marriage and family therapist specializing in military and first responder individuals, families, and couples. She is proficient with clients experiencing PTSD, CPTSD, and dissociative disorders.
For her, helping those with traumatic experiences is not just a job, it is a vocation. She is experienced in multiple modalities and utilizes whatever is best for her clients' needs. She stays abreast of the latest research and treatments to provide the best possible outcomes for her clients. Call Bearings Therapy today, 214-892-2158. From your hosts, Drew
and Garden System.
Thank you for listening to A Couple of Multiples, the reality of dissociative identity disorder. This podcast is intended for educational purposes and is not a replacement for therapy.
Listening to this podcast does not constitute a therapeutic relationship with the hosts or any guest speakers.
If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review. We would love to hear what you enjoyed the most.
You can visit our website at acoupleofmultiples.com for additional information, including how to join our new online paid community called Hearts Multiplied, to book a consultation session, to access additional resources, and to also subscribe to our mailing list to receive future updates.
Remember, every system is unique, and your experiences may be different from ours, and that's okay. You matter and are loved for being all of yous.